Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once there was a lovely princess called Snow White. Her stepmother, the queen, was beautiful but very vain. The queen loved to look into her magic mirror and say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the mirror always said, "Queen, you are fairest of us all." But Snow White grew more beautiful as she grew older, and one day the mirror said, "Queen, thou art fairest that I see, but Snow White is more fair than thee." Furious, the queen called to her guard and ordered him to kill Snow White. The guard could not bear to hurt the innocent girl, and simply took her deep into the woods, where he left her all alone, but he told the queen that Snow White was dead. Poor Snow White wandered through the frightening woods for a long while. At last she came to a little cottage. She knocked timidly at the door, and was surprised when it was opened by the tiniest person she had ever seen. The cottage was owned by 7 little dwarfs. When they learned what the wicked queen had done to Snow White, they offered to let her live with them. Snow White agreed, and they settled into a happy routine. Each morning the dwarfs would go off to work, and each evening they would return to warm supper and a house as neat as a pin. All the while the queen believed Snow White was dead. Then one day she stood in front of her magic mirror and said those familiar words, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the mirror answered, "Queen, thou art fairest that I see, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair than thee." Imagine how shocked and angry the queen was. With magic spells she created a poisonous apple. Then she disguised herself as an old peddler and set off for the 7 dwarfs' cottage. Once there she called out, "Apples for sale, delicious apples." Snow White told the old woman she had no money. "For one so pretty as you, the apple is free," the old woman said. Snow White could not resist. She took the apple and bit into it. As soon as she did, she fell down, still and cold. The queen laughed with glee and disappeared into the woods. When the 7 dwarfs came home, they were heartbroken to find their dear Snow White lying there. She looked too beautiful to bury, so they placed her in a glass coffin atop a high hill. Each dwarf took a turn keeping watch. Snow White lay there for a long, long time, but her appearance never changed. She seemed only to be sleeping. One day a king's son rode by and was charmed by Snow White's beauty. He begged the dwarfs to move the coffin so he could see her better. As they picked it up, the bit of apple fell out of her mouth and she awoke. Seeing Snow White's lovely face made the prince joyful. They walked and talked and soon fell in love. The 7 dwarfs were the guests of honor at the grand celebration of their marriage. A great feast was held, and Snow White danced with everyone. Before the night ended, she and the prince made the dwarfs promise to visit them often at the castle. And so they all lived happily ever after.